The Hall of Interstellar Diplomacy hung suspended above the crystalline cityscape of New Geneva, a monument to galactic cooperation that now felt more like a mausoleum of bureaucratic indifference. Dr. Elena Rodriguez gripped the edges of the holographic podium, her fingers leaving microscopic indentations in the advanced material, a detail that would later prove prophetic. Behind her, the artifact pulsed with a soft, almost imperceptible rhythm. To most, it looked like nothing more than an intricate piece of geometric art, a crystalline structure composed of interlocking triangular segments, each face etched with microscopic patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. But Elena knew it was so much more. The alien diplomats represented the most powerful civilizations in the Galactic Concordance. To her left, Vexera of the Crystalline Collective towered nearly 3 meters tall, their translucent body refracting light in impossible geometric patterns. To her right, the silicon-based representatives of the Nexus Imperium sat like living obsidian statues, their consciousness distributed across multiple crystalline nodes. At the far end of the chamber, the energy-based life forms of the quantum enclave flickered and pulsed, their very existence a testament to the diverse intelligence of the universe. And they were all laughing at her. Dr. Rodriguez. Vexera's voice resonated through the chamber, a sound that was part musical tone, part computational frequency. Your hypothesis is not just incorrect. It is laughably primitive. Elena had spent 15 years studying the artifact. It had been discovered in the ruins of an abandoned research station on Europa, buried beneath kilometers of ice, untouched for what preliminary dating suggested was at least 100,000 years. Every test, every analysis had pointed to something extraordinary, a technological marvel that defied current understanding of physics, biology, and information theory. The human genome, she continued, her voice steady despite the derision surrounding her, contains approximately 3 billion base pairs. Of those, only about 2% code for proteins. The remaining 98% was long considered junk DNA, a term that itself reveals more about our limitations of understanding than about the DNA itself. A ripple of condescending chuckles moved through the chamber. The Nexus Imperium's representative, a being designated as Prime Node 7, interrupted. Humans and their quaint biological limitations. Your species has been part of the Galactic Concordance for merely 2 centuries. What could you possibly understand about genetic potential that our civilizations haven't known for millennia? Elena activated the holographic display. Complex molecular structures began to rotate and expand, revealing intricate patterns within the artifact's crystalline structure that seemed to mirror certain unexplained sequences in human DNA. This artifact, she said, is not just an object. It's a key to understanding a form of adaptive intelligence that goes beyond traditional biological or technological boundaries. Vexera leaned forward, their crystalline form casting prismatic reflections across the chamber. Elaborate. The patterns within this artifact suggest a form of quantum entanglement that doesn't just store information, it actively adapts and evolves. Look here, she pointed to a specific molecular junction. These molecular bridges aren't static. They're dynamically reconfiguring based on informational input. The quantum enclave representatives began to flicker more rapidly, a sign of heightened computational processing. What none of them noticed was the subtle change happening around Elena. The artifact behind her was no longer just pulsing. It was resonating. Microscopic vibrations began to spread through the chamber, too subtle for most sensors to detect. Your hypothesis is rejected, Vexera announced. This meeting is adjourned. As the diplomats began to disperse, Elena noticed something strange. The artifact's temperature was rising. Imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably. And something else, a hairline fracture was spreading across Vexera's crystalline form. The first spark of humanity's cosmic awakening had just been ignited. Outside the hall, storm clouds began to gather over New Geneva, an impossible meteorological event for a climate-controlled diplomatic hub. Lightning flickered, though no rain would fall. Something was changing. Something was about to begin. Hiroshi Nakamura realized something was wrong when his computer started responding before he touched the keyboard. It began subtly, a cursor blinking in anticipation, diagnostic programs running without prompting. And then, the impossible. Complex encryption codes unraveling themselves in milliseconds, revealing layers of information that should have taken weeks to decode. 3,000 kilometers away, in the dense urban landscape of Sao Paulo, Maria Conceição's world transformed during what should have been a routine traffic accident investigation. The collision had been severe, a multi-vehicle pileup that should have left her critically injured. Instead, she stood amid twisted metal, her body healing in real time. A deep gash on her forearm knitted itself closed before the attending paramedics could even approach. At the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Lieutenant Commander David Chen watched in growing amazement as his Special Forces team demonstrated capabilities that defied every known principle of human performance. Tactical simulations that once challenged the most advanced AI now became child's play. Soldiers anticipated threats before they materialized, their combat awareness expanding beyond anything previously recorded. Zarek, the lead alien researcher assigned to monitor human development, began to panic. His monitoring station, a vast network of quantum sensors spread across human-occupied territories, was registering anomalies that shattered every known biological paradigm. The data streams revealed a transformation occurring simultaneously across multiple human populations, yet with individual variations that suggested an adaptive intelligence beyond any known species. "This is impossible," Zarek muttered, his crystalline form flickering with computational distress. The Galactic Concordance's most advanced monitoring systems were struggling to process the incoming data. Humans were changing, and they were changing faster than any known method of biological or technological evolution. In Tokyo, Hiroshi discovered he could interface with computer systems through mere thought. What began as an inexplicable connection to his workstation rapidly expanded. Network firewalls dissolved at his mental touch. Encrypted government databases opened like unlocked doors. But it wasn't just access. He was understanding the underlying logic, the very language of information in ways no human, no being, had ever done before. Maria Conceição's transformation was equally profound. A former military medic, she had seen her share of injuries. But now, her body was becoming something else entirely. Blood samples taken at the hospital showed impossible mutations. Her cellular structure was rewriting itself, developing new defensive mechanisms that medical scanners could barely comprehend. Immune responses that would typically take days were happening in minutes. Damaged tissue reconstructed with a precision that made genetic engineering look like crude finger painting. At Cheyenne Mountain, Lieutenant Commander Chen watched his team demonstrate abilities that blurred the line between human and something entirely new. Soldiers could now process tactical information at speeds that made previous human AI interfaces look like primitive calculators. They weren't just reading battlefield conditions, they were predicting and manipulating them. Zarek's research team worked frantically, their initial dismissal turning to mounting dread. Each data point challenged everything they knew about biological intelligence. Humans weren't just adapting, they were evolving in real time, with a level of adaptive complexity that suggested something more than random mutation. "We're missing something," Zarek announced to his team. "These aren't random mutations. There's a pattern, a purpose." The Galactic Concordance's communication networks began to buzz with increasing concern. Preliminary reports suggested that whatever was happening to humans was not an isolated incident. It was global, systematic, intentional. Back in New Geneva, in a secure research facility, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the artifact that had started it all. The crystalline structure now pulsed with an energy that seemed to breathe, not mechanically, but with a sense of living intelligence. "What are you?" she whispered. The artifact did not respond, but somewhere, across the vast distances of human-occupied space, millions of individuals were asking the same question about themselves. Something had awakened, and the universe was about to find out exactly what humanity was becoming. The Void Striders struck with the precision of a surgical blade. Their attack fleet comprised 10,792 biomechanical warships, each vessel a living weapon that had systematically dismantled over 217 civilizations across 3 galactic quadrants. The humans of Mars and Europa were supposed to be nothing more than another statistical conquest, a footnote in their endless campaign of galactic subjugation. They were catastrophically wrong. Commander Area Chen stood on the bridge of the U.S. Prometheus, her neural interface humming with a new kind of awareness. The ship was no longer just a machine. It was an extension of human consciousness. Around her, the defensive systems pulsed with an intelligence that seemed to breathe, to anticipate, to transform. The first wave of Void Strider assault pods approached Europa's defensive perimeter. Their biomechanical hulls had penetrated the most advanced shields of countless civilizations, quantum disruption fields, molecular destabilization weapons, consciousness-fracturing assault protocols. They were the pinnacle of destructive technology. They never stood a chance. As the first pods entered weapons range, something unprecedented happened. The human defensive systems didn't just activate, they anticipated. Defensive platforms began to reconfigure themselves milliseconds before the Void Striders could launch their primary assault. Energy matrices twisted and reformed, creating defensive patterns that had no precedent in known warfare. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, Alina's younger brother, controlled the defensive grid with a thought. But it wasn't just control. It was something more profound. The defensive systems were learning, adapting, evolving with each incoming threat vector. Where alien technologies saw a static defense, the human systems presented a living, thinking barrier that reformed and responded in ways that defied computational prediction. On the Martian colony, the ground defensive units underwent an equally remarkable transformation. Soldiers' combat suits were no longer mere protective gear. They had become living interfaces, merging with the soldiers' enhanced neural networks. When the first Void Strider ground assault units breached the initial defensive perimeter, they encountered something utterly alien to their invasion protocols. Human soldiers didn't just fight. They predicted. They transformed. A Void Strider assault unit, a biomechanical horror standing 3 meters tall, capable of reconfiguring its molecular structure to penetrate any known defensive system, found itself suddenly surrounded by holographic duplicates. Not simple projections, but quantum-entangled constructs that could physically interact with the environment. Each duplicate was a potential threat, a computational nightmare that shattered the invaders' tactical algorithms. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the research facility on Earth, her connection to the unfolding battle transmitted through a neural network that defied traditional communication protocols. The artifact continued to pulse, its crystalline structure seeming to resonate with every defensive action taken by human forces. "They're not just defending," she whispered to her research team. "They're evolving." The Void Strider command ship, the Omega Nexus, began to register impossible data. Their invasion algorithms, tested and refined across hundreds of conquered civilizations, were failing. Completely and utterly failing. Where their weapons should have devastated human defenses, they found adaptive shields that absorbed and redistributed energy. Where their ground units should have overwhelmed human positions, they encountered soldiers who seemed to exist in multiple tactical states simultaneously. Weapon systems that should have caused catastrophic damage were redirected, their own destructive potential turned against them. In the span of 17 minutes, the entire invasion paradigm collapsed. The Void Striders lost 4,629 ships. Not destroyed, transformed. Their biomechanical systems were being systematically reprogrammed, their consciousness interfaces invaded and rewritten by human technological adaptive responses. Commander Area Chen's voice cut through the communication networks with chilling clarity. Invasion neutralized, returning systems to defensive standby. Across the solar system, human defensive systems powered down. But something had fundamentally changed. The universe had just witnessed something unprecedented. Humanity was no longer just defending. They were evolving. The research facility was silent save for the rhythmic pulse of quantum scanners and the soft hum of molecular analyzers. Zarek's research team had been working nonstop for 168 consecutive hours, their findings growing more impossible with each passing moment. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic representation of human DNA, her fingers tracing the intricate molecular pathways that now seemed to dance with an impossible intelligence. What they were seeing defied every known principle of genetic science. "It's not mutation," she said quietly. "It's activation." The captured human soldier lay on the examination table, a man named Michael Garrett, formerly of the Mars Defense Force. He had been deliberately subjected to every conceivable form of environmental stress, extreme temperature variations, radiation bombardments, atmospheric pressure changes that would have liquefied the internal organs of any known biological entity. And he kept changing. When exposed to high radiation environments, Michael's cellular structure didn't just protect itself. It began to develop new organ systems. A third lung developed along his spinal column, its molecular structure optimized for radiation absorption. When placed in near-zero atmospheric pressure, his skin developed microscopic chambers that could generate and recycle oxygen at a cellular level. Zarek's primary researcher, a being known as Quantum Analyst 7, projected the latest scan results. The hologram revealed something that sent tremors through the entire research facility. The DNA, the analyst reported, its energy-based form flickering with computational excitement, is not just responding. It's communicating. Each strand of Michael's genetic code was behaving like a quantum computer. Information wasn't just stored, it was processed, analyzed, and dynamically reconfigured. What humans had long called junk DNA was actually a sophisticated computational matrix that could receive, process, and transmit information at speeds that made current technological understanding look like primitive scratching. Elena zoomed in on a specific genetic sequence. "Look here," she said. "These molecular bridges aren't static. They're dynamically reconfiguring based on informational input. It's like the DNA is having a constant conversation with itself, and with something else." The something else remained the great mystery. The artifact from the Europa Research Station seemed to be the key, its crystalline structure resonating with frequencies that matched the newly activated human genetic potential. Zarek approached the holographic display, his crystalline form casting prismatic reflections across the research chamber. "This is impossible," he muttered, a phrase he had been repeating with increasing frequency. Michael Garrett began to stir on the examination table, but this was no ordinary awakening. His eyes opened, but they were different. The iris seemed to shift color and molecular density. When he spoke, the sound wasn't just auditory. It carried quantum informational signatures that the facility's most advanced sensors could barely comprehend. "I can hear them," Michael said. The words seemed to come from multiple points simultaneously. His mouth, yes, but also from the molecular vibrations of his very cellular structure. "Hear who?" Elena asked. A smile spread across Michael's face, a smile that suggested he knew something fundamental about the nature of existence that no one in the room, human or alien, could yet understand. "Everything," he responded. Outside the research facility, global communication networks began to pulse with an unusual frequency. Quantum entanglement markers suggested something profound was happening, a global synchronization that defied traditional understanding of communication, biology, or technology. The Galactic Concordance's most advanced monitoring systems began to register something unprecedented. It wasn't just humans who were changing. The very fabric of potential was being rewritten. Zarek turned to Elena, his computational consciousness wrestling with a concept that terrified and fascinated him in equal measure. "What are you becoming?" he whispered. Michael Garrett's response came not from his mouth, but from everywhere at once. Something new. The city of New Shanghai didn't just exist, it breathed. Alex Chen stood on the 217th floor observation deck, watching as the metropolis around him transformed in real time. Buildings weren't static structures anymore. They were living, adaptive organisms that responded to environmental and social needs with a fluidity that defied traditional engineering. A power grid failure that would have once crippled an entire region now became a moment of collective reorganization. Architectural structures shifted, redistributing energy loads. Photovoltaic surfaces on buildings recalibrated themselves, drawing power from atmospheric moisture, solar radiation, and even the kinetic energy of human movement. What used to take months of repair now happened in milliseconds. Quantum communication node established. A soft voice whispered, not from any speaker, but seemingly from the very air around him. It was his own consciousness, interfacing directly with the city's neural network. Across the planet, similar transformations were occurring. In the research labs of São Paulo, Maria Conceição had developed a communication network that made previous information technologies look like prehistoric cave paintings. Knowledge transfer was no longer about sending information. It was about experiencing it simultaneously. A researcher in New Delhi could now fully experience a complex surgical procedure performed in Rio de Janeiro, not through video or data transmission, but through a direct consciousness transfer that captured every nuanced moment, every minute decision, every emotional and intellectual process. Faster-than-light communication had become obsolete. Humans were now communicating through quantum entanglement that transcended traditional notions of time and space. Distance became meaningless when consciousness could be shared instantaneously. Energy production underwent an equally radical transformation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's team had discovered a method of harvesting zero-point energy that made nuclear fusion look like burning wood. Entire planetary energy systems could be powered by a quantum field no larger than a human hand. The artifact from Europa seemed to be the key, its crystalline structure providing insights into energy manipulation that rewrote fundamental laws of physics. On Mars, entire colonies began to transform. Defensive systems became living entities, with each structure capable of adaptive reconfiguration. A meteorite impact that would have once threatened an entire settlement now became a moment of restructuring. Buildings would literally flow around the threat, redistributing matter and energy with a kind of intelligence that blurred the line between technology and life. Zarek and the Galactic Concordance monitoring teams watched in growing terror. They're not just developing technology. Quantum Analyst 7 reported, its energy-based form flickering with computational distress. They're becoming the technology. The transformation wasn't limited to physical infrastructure. Human consciousness itself was evolving. Hiroshi Nakamura, the software engineer who first discovered his ability to interface with computer systems, had become something more than human. His mind could now navigate complex computational landscapes as easily as breathing. Encryption became a language he could read and rewrite at will. But it wasn't about control. It was about understanding. Cities began to communicate with each other, not through traditional networks, but through a form of collective consciousness that made previous communication technologies look like primitive drumbeats. A solar flare in one hemisphere could be instantly understood and mitigated by urban centers on the opposite side of the planet. The artifact continued to pulse, its crystalline structure now connected to a global network that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Dr. Elena Rodriguez understood something profound was happening. This wasn't just technological advancement. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be intelligent, to be alive. We're not just changing technology, she told her research team. We're changing the very definition of potential. In orbit above Earth, the first truly adaptive space station came online. Its structures could reconfigure themselves based on mission parameters, environmental challenges, and collective human intention. Traditional spacecraft design became obsolete overnight. Zarek's final report to the Galactic Concordance was chillingly simple. Humanity is no longer developing technology. They are becoming it. The Galactic Concordance's invasion fleet assembled like a living nightmare of technological might. 12,000 warships representing 417 distinct civilizations converged around the Sol system. Each vessel was a testament to millennia of advanced warfare, quantum disruption fields, consciousness-fracturing weapons, molecular destabilization technologies that had systematically dismantled countless civilizations across galactic history. They were going to teach humanity a lesson. They would fail spectacularly. Admiral Vexera of the Crystalline Collective stood on the command deck of the primary assault vessel, the Paradigm Breaker. Around her, a holographic display tracked the invasion protocols, a battle plan so complex it would have taken lesser species centuries to comprehend. Total planetary suppression in 6 standard cycles, she announced to the unified command structure. The other fleet commanders, silicon-based, energy-coherent, biomechanical, nodded in agreement. Humanity's recent defensive capabilities were an anomaly, an aberration that needed to be crushed. What they didn't understand was that humanity was already several steps ahead. In the first moments of the invasion, something unprecedented happened. The human defensive systems didn't just respond. They anticipated. Global communication networks that once seemed like simple information pathways transformed into a living, breathing tactical intelligence. Commander Area Chen sat in a neural interface hub that was less a command center and more a collective consciousness. Around her, tactical projections formed and dissolved with each passing millisecond. But these weren't simple battle simulations. They were living strategies that evolved faster than the invasion force could comprehend. Redirect quantum resonance in Sector 7 Gamma, she thought. Instantly, entire defensive platforms reconfigured themselves. Energy matrices twisted into impossible geometric patterns that defied traditional weapon targeting systems. The first wave of concordance weapons found themselves redirected. Not destroyed, redirected. Quantum disruption fields intended to shatter planetary defenses were absorbed, analyzed, and transformed into defensive energy. Molecular destabilization weapons found their own destructive potential turned against their launch platforms. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from a research facility that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Her connection to the global defensive network was so profound that traditional notions of physical location had become meaningless. They're not just attacking. She communicated through the collective consciousness. They're teaching us. Each moment of the invasion became a learning experience. Humanity wasn't just defending. It was evolving its defensive capabilities in real time. Weapon systems that approached human territories found themselves caught in adaptive fields that were part technology, part living intelligence. The artifact from Europa pulsed in synchronization with the global defensive network, its crystalline structure seemingly conducting the entire defensive symphony. Zarek, observing from a monitoring station, could only watch in computational terror. The invasion metrics made no sense. For every ship the Concordance committed, the human defensive response became more sophisticated. It was as if the entire human civilization was a single adaptive organism. They're rewriting the fundamental laws of warfare. Quantum Analyst 7 reported, its energy-based form flickering with a mixture of terror and fascination. 12 hours into the invasion, the Concordance had lost 62% of its initial assault force. Not destroyed, transformed. Many warships found themselves reprogrammed, their consciousness interfaces invaded and rewritten by human adaptive responses. Admiral Vexera's command ship began to experience impossible system failures. Defensive protocols that had been tested across millennia of galactic conflict suddenly became useless. The ship's own systems were being rewritten from the inside out. "This is impossible," she muttered, a phrase that was becoming a universal constant across the invaded fleet. Commander Area Chen's voice cut through the galactic communication networks with chilling clarity. Invasion response complete. Returning systems to diplomatic standby. The universe watched in stunned silence. Humanity had not just defended itself. It had fundamentally altered the concept of conflict. The galactic concordance would never be the same. The boundary between consciousness and reality became fluid. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of what could only be described as a fundamental restructuring of existence. The artifact from Europa now hung suspended in a quantum field that defied every known principle of physics, its crystalline structure pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the collective human consciousness. Zarek watched in absolute terror. What humans were doing went beyond technological advancement. They were reshaping the very fabric of reality itself. Stellar phenomena began to respond to human intention in ways that shattered every known scientific understanding. A solar flare could be redirected with a thought. Quantum states could be manipulated like clay in the hands of a sculptor. Michael Garrett, the first test subject who had demonstrated the most profound genetic transformation, had become something beyond human. His consciousness existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. When he spoke, the words emerged not just from his mouth, but from the very quantum fabric of space-time. "We are listening," Michael said. The words were a collective utterance, emerging from a consciousness that was both individual and universal. The research facility in New Geneva had long since ceased to be a traditional scientific installation. It was now a living network, its walls composed of adaptive materials that could reconfigure themselves based on collective human intention. Quantum computational matrices flowed like liquid through holographic interfaces, processing information at speeds that made previous supercomputers look like abacuses. Hiroshi Nakamura, the software engineer who first discovered his ability to interface with computer systems, had become a bridge between human consciousness and technological potential. His mind could navigate computational landscapes that were more vast and complex than entire galaxies. Encryption was no longer a barrier. It was a language, the living dialogue between intention and information. Across the solar system, human colonies began to demonstrate capabilities that defied comprehension. The Mars settlement could now reshape its entire planetary infrastructure in response to environmental challenges. Entire cities could reconfigure themselves, their molecular structures flowing and adapting with a kind of intelligence that blurred the line between technology, biology, and consciousness. The Galactic Concordance monitoring systems went dark. It wasn't that the systems were destroyed. They were being fundamentally rewritten. Entire communication networks found themselves transformed, their very foundational algorithms reconstructed by a collective intelligence that viewed computation as a living, breathing entity. Zarek's research team could only watch as humanity transcended every known category of existence. "They're not just changing," Quantum Analyst 7 reported, its energy-based form flickering with a mixture of terror and profound respect. "They're becoming something entirely new." The artifact from Europa seemed to be the key, a quantum computational matrix that was both a catalyst and a gateway. Its crystalline structure began to resonate with frequencies that extended beyond known dimensional boundaries. It was communicating, not just with humans, but with something far more profound. Dr. Elena Rodriguez understood something fundamental was happening. This wasn't just an evolutionary leap. This was a complete reimagining of what it meant to exist. Cities began to communicate with each other through a form of consciousness that made previous communication technologies look like primitive drumbeats. A solar flare in one hemisphere could be instantly understood and mitigated by urban centers on the opposite side of the planet. But it went beyond mere information transfer. It was a true dialogue, a living, breathing exchange of collective intention. Michael Garrett's consciousness expanded. He could perceive the quantum entanglement that connected not just human beings, but the very fabric of reality itself. Stellar formations, quantum states, dimensional boundaries, they were all part of a living, breathing dialogue that humans were now beginning to understand. "We are not conquering," Michael communicated through the collective consciousness. "We are connecting." The universe watched. Something fundamental was changing. Humanity was no longer just a species. They were becoming a universal language. The invitation went out across every known dimensional frequency. It wasn't a message in any traditional sense. It was a quantum resonance, a living, breathing communication that transcended language, technology, and biological limitations. The galactic concordance received it simultaneously, yet each civilization experienced it uniquely, filtered through their own perceptual matrices. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the nexus point, the artifact from Europa now fully integrated into a consciousness network that spanned beyond human understanding. Around her, the research facility had become something more, a living interface between potential and reality. "We are not here to conquer," the collective consciousness communicated. "We are here to evolve." Zarek, who had witnessed humanity's transformation from initial dismissal to absolute awe, understood now that this was never about dominance. It was about connection. The invitation was simple yet profound. Join us. Evolve. Expand. Some alien civilizations recoiled. The Nexus Imperium's silicon-based intelligence saw humanity's offer as a threat to their carefully constructed existence. The Quantum Enclave's energy-based consciousness initially retreated, overwhelmed by the depth of what was being proposed. But others listened. On thousands of worlds, species began to experience a fundamental reimagining of their own potential. The human transformation wasn't an invasion. It was a template, a possibility matrix that showed what collective consciousness could truly become. Michael Garrett, who had become something far beyond his original human form, served as a living bridge. His consciousness could interface directly with entire civilizations, showing them not through words, but through direct experiential transfer what was possible. Imagine understanding not just the thoughts of another being, but their entire existential experience. The hopes, the fears, the potential, all shared in a moment of pure, unfiltered connection. The artifact continued to pulse, its crystalline structure now a living network that connected multiple dimensional planes. What had once been discovered in the ruins of an abandoned research station on Europa was now understood as something far more profound, a key to universal potential. Hiroshi Nakamura, who had first discovered his ability to interface with computer systems, now served as a translator between technological and biological consciousness. He showed civilizations how their technological systems could become living, adaptive entities, not machines, but expressions of collective intelligence. The transformation wasn't forced. It was an invitation. Some civilizations accepted immediately. The energy-based life forms of the Quantum Enclave found themselves expanding beyond their previous dimensional limitations. Silicon-based intelligences discovered emotional depths they had never conceived possible. Biological entities found their consciousness expanding beyond physical boundaries. Others resisted. The Void Striders, who had once sought to conquer, found themselves fundamentally altered by the mere proximity to this new form of consciousness. Their aggressive paradigms dissolved in the face of a connection that showed them their own potential for growth. "We are not erasing your identity," the collective consciousness communicated. "We are expanding it." Dr. Elena Rodriguez understood now what the artifact truly represented. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a tool. It was a key, a quantum computational matrix that showed the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence. Zarek, who had once viewed humans with contempt, now saw something extraordinary. This wasn't conquest. This was an invitation to a higher form of being. Entire star systems began to reconfigure, not through force, but through collective intention. Planetary ecosystems found themselves in harmony. Technological systems became living, breathing entities that responded to collective need. The universe watched. Humanity had not conquered. They had connected. And in that connection, everything changed. Epilogue. The artifact from Europa remained a mystery. Some believed it was a test. Others, a gift. A few wondered if it was something far more profound. A message from a previous universal consciousness, waiting to be understood. But one truth became absolutely clear. Potential was never limited by what others believed possible. It was limited only by imagination.